All right, so one of the first things that we talk about at Theophilus Health is the importance of sleep. And if most of us don't know at this point, it would be surprising because we hear all the time that like sleep, sleep, sleep. We have to get sufficient sleep. But I think one thing that a lot of people fail to realize is just how really truly important sleep is. Because if a lot of us believed just how important sleep was, I think a lot of us would be a lot better at prioritizing it. And so, we always say put your money where your mouth is. And in this situation, if you truly believe that sleep is important, let's see you actually manifest that in your life. Because if you say you believe it and you're not doing it, then you're either intentionally sabotaging your health or you don't actually believe that it's important. And so, one thing I like to challenge you right off the bat is if you're watching this and you're like, no, I think I sleep pretty well, we're going to have you fill out a couple things and have you do a bit of a self survey for yourself just to see exactly how often you prioritize your sleep and how well you are sleeping when you actually are sleeping. Because at the end of the day, if you are getting less than 6 hours of sleep per night, according to some research, you're likely to increase your pain perception by as much as 60%. So this is significant because you could have very little pain, mechanical pain, getting very little sleep, less than 6 hours a night, and now all of a sudden you are literally experiencing an increase of 60% of your pain perception just because you're not sleeping. The other factor is that, about 40, 50 years ago, the average sleep duration for most adults was about 7.9 hours, about 8 hours on average. Now you look at it, and most people in modern day society, we're getting about 6 to 6.8. And actually, a third of Americans, about 35%, are getting less than 6 hours of sleep per night on average. And so that is technically considered a sleep deprivation. So as soon as you go into a sleep deprivation, we start seeing major effects on our immune system. So our immune system is able to make white blood cells while we are sleeping. And so if you are not sleeping and getting insufficient sleep, your body just literally cannot make white blood cells. And so it has a hard time doing that. So over time, you start seeing this debt occur. And this debt occurs across your immune system. It occurs across your adrenal glands. It occurs across your ability to digest and absorb. And it leads to more oxidative stress long term. So that is a huge, huge critical thing. So if you're having issues with the immune system, you have a chronic stuffy nose, you're having a hard time with cold and flu season, you're really susceptible to getting sick, these are all signs that your body is really having a hard time restocking the supplies necessary for your immune system. But more than that, if you're coming to us and you're having hormonal imbalances, when I say hormonal imbalances, I'm talking about excessive weight gain, low energy, maybe a lot of pain with your menstrual cycle, or you're just having a lot of issues with your stress. These are all signs that you're having hormonal imbalances. So hormonal imbalances are influenced by a lot of different things, but the primary thing that we see, again, getting back to sleep, is that if you're not sleeping, you cannot restock your hormones sufficiently in order to make more things like estrogen or testosterone or progesterone, all these things that are so vital for the human body to function and feel good, now all of a sudden is just not being prioritized because we're getting too little sleep. But more than that, conditions like diabetes and heart disease and endocrine, well, I guess that's diabetes, but all these kind of things, hormonal imbalances, are being dramatically increased and multiplied because we're getting less sleep. And this is a personal story, but when I was in my 20s, going through grad school, getting my doctorate, I was trying to train myself to get about 4 hours of sleep a night and feel good on it. Well, little did I know I was creating a multitude of dynamics of health problems for myself. That is actually what led me to go into functional medicine after I got my doctorate, because I figured out in the conventional medical system, I could not fix my own problems because I thought, sleep was not a big deal. That diet was, just eat the standard American diet and try to just become the entrepreneur, like work, work, work mentality. And that just led to more and more of my own demise when it came to my health. So again, I was an idiotic 25-year-old, but I see this often in my practice where people come into us and they think that it's like a badge of honor, like getting very little sleep and functioning on it is like it's a badge of honor, and it's really not. Like, you're destroying your health in the process. So sleep is a top priority for you. If it's not, let's figure out why it's not a top priority. So one of the things I want you to do is write down some beliefs that you have about your current life, about your sleep. And if you have a hard time falling asleep quickly, I want you to write that down. If it takes you 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 minutes to fall asleep, I want you to note that. The second thing I want you to do is to notify or to think about if you wake up in the middle of the night. A lot of people will say to me, well, I wake up to go to the bathroom, but doesn't everybody? And I would say, no, they don't. Because what happens is if you're sleeping and your melatonin is supposed to be nice and high, and if your melatonin is actually dropping because of you have a disruption in your circadian rhythm, you have a big you drink a lot of caffeine, all these things will start to increase your cortisol levels, which if your cortisol is getting too high and your melatonin is too low, now all of a sudden your ability to have deep sleep and to get through all the cycles of your sleep cycle are going to be impaired. So when you start having the urge to go to the bathroom and your brain is normally not giving your bladder a bunch of attention because of the sleep cycle you're in, if you're in a light state of sleep, you will wake up more often to go to the bathroom. So like that's a big problem. So like that's something that we want to be mindful of and also use as a marker to determine if we are having high cortisol levels, if we're having insufficient melatonin levels, if we are drinking alcohol before bed and we're causing a sedation or a light sleep, or if we're doing things that are stimulating our brain right before bed, like being on our iPhone or Samsung, whatever phone you have, or being on your laptop or watching a show that's stimulating cortisol or stimulating these receptors in our brain that are stimulatory. So all these things will start to create this sleep debt. And so over time, if you're finding yourself at 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning just becoming really fatigued, and without your coffee throughout the day or without your caffeine, you can't make it through or you have a big crash, that's all a sign that you are experiencing a sleep debt. And sleep debt basically happens when you start to have a buildup of this thing, adenosine, which is basically what Dr. Matthew Walker calls a sleep pressure. And sleep pressure builds and builds as time goes on throughout the day. The thing is, if your circadian rhythm is too low or it's out of whack because you're not having consistent sleep patterns, you will start to experience a major urge to sleep. And as that urge goes on, you will have a hard time suppressing that unless you are doing things like drinking caffeine, because caffeine will actually block those receptors of adenosine so that you don't necessarily feel that urge to sleep, but the pressure is still building. So as soon as that caffeine wears off, which for some people can be 5 to 7 hours, which is the half-life of caffeine, for other people it can take you a couple days to really clear that caffeine out of your system to where it's not affecting you. And so if you're always stimulating yourself to kind of push past and block those receptors to where you're not noticing it, you're not doing yourself any favors, because it will create a sleep debt as time goes on. And so the best thing I can say is, if you're having sleep problems and you're drinking caffeine past 10, 11 o'clock in the morning, and you're maybe metabolizing caffeine not as well as you used to because you have issues detoxifying, which we'll cover down the road if you become a client of ours, that can become a big, big problem. And then we add on top, maybe you're drinking alcohol before bed, inducing a state of light sleep, not getting into the deeper stages of your sleep cycle. Now you're going to wake up and you're going to be caught in this coffee or this caffeine alcohol cycle where you're reliant on more sugar or more caffeine, which is trying to boost your cortisol and suppress those adenosine receptors. And it's going to make it, you're just not going to have as much energy long term, because you're literally causing this pseudo energy that is just actually making the problem much, much worse. And so the best recommendation I can say is, if you're a client of ours going through this course, is to analyze, like, okay, when do I stop with my caffeine? What time of day am I stopping this? Because if it's 2, 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, you are not helping yourself. If you're on your phone right before bed and you're scrolling through social media and you're looking at these things and you're getting stimulated, whether it's through looking at politics or news or just the blue light itself, that is not going to be helping you. It's actually going to be creating a stimulatory effect on your brain. And then that, in conjunction with the caffeine you had earlier in that day, and maybe even the food you ate a couple hours before, is all going to be increasing your body's cortisol and making it harder for you to sustain a deep state of sleep. And so really that's what we're shooting for with you if you're our client. And we want to make sure that you understand this really well. We're going to give you a handout that you'll be able to go through. And we give you, I think it's like top 7 steps to really whip this stuff and really get a hold of it and get in front of it. Because again, if you believe and understand, if this video wasn't enough to convince you, let's go a step further and figure out why you're not convinced that sleep is so important. If you believe that sleep is important, why aren't you taking the steps to actually have good sleep? Because if you are subconsciously sabotaging your health, which I'll get into that in just a little bit, but I'll kind of explain it. Well, I'll get into it now. Basically, if you've had a history of trauma, whether it's big trauma or a little trauma, that have accumulated over the course of your life, there's a lot of research that supports or shows that if you have experienced a lot of trauma, you are more likely to sabotage your relationships, your finances, your health. And so again, if that's something that you've been dealing with and you haven't talked to a counselor, you haven't talked to us about it, let's talk about that. Because again, if you're getting back down to belief that, like, yeah, I understand that sleep is important. Okay, then why aren't you doing it? Like, why aren't we prioritizing it? And why don't you value it? Because if you can see the correlation of how it can really mess up your health, and you believe that that's really doing that for you, my guess is that you'll fix it and that you'll make it a priority, and you'll stop kind of messing around and beating around the bush, that you'll actually admit where you're having some issues and take some responsibility with what you're not doing well and with some things that you are doing well, and also just some things that you can't control, right? Like you can't control all your situations. Like if you have a really rough job where you have to work a really weird shift, that's just like something that you can't necessarily control. Like you can try to get a different job, all those different things, but if you are in that and you have no other option, there are still things that you can do to control your sleep that will greatly impact your ability to heal, make hormones, convert short-term to long-term memories, and just feel like a new person. So I hope this is informative. I hope you guys do the homework that I'll kind of be providing to you, and you can actually, more importantly, just take this information, instead of just learning more information about it, actually apply this information. And that's something that we're going to do when you come into our office to see us when we have individual coaching, or whether it's online, virtually. We're going to walk you through these things, and we're going to have this conversation again. But I just want you to be thinking about it, be planning ahead, so that you can actually start to do something about it, to where you can actually see a life-altering change. Let's get started on doing that, and let's get your health to where it is being maximized and you're not experiencing all this dis-ease in your life.